Well, hello and welcome to the show. Today, one of the leading AI researchers, Mustafa Suleyman, said this in his book, The Coming Wave. Never before have we witnessed technologies with such transformative potential, promising to reshape our world in ways that are both awe-inspiring and daunting. As the technology has progressed over the years, my concerns have grown. And so here's the question is, if one of the leading AI researchers' concerns are growing, where are we at? Where are you at? Now, this isn't just Mustafa Suleyman in his book, The Coming Wave, where he actually talks about technology and the new AI technology. Like, technology has always come in waves is what he talks about. And you can't stop it. Like, there's no, that's not the point of today's show, is to be like, how do we stop AI and technology? Like, run away. No, you can't stop the waves. But he says this wave is more like a tsunami, where if we are not careful, it will destroy us. And what we see is that there's an increase in issues rising with the next generation. So here's a few examples. Sherry Turkle, psychologist at MIT, wrote the book Alone Together, where she argued that we have the loneliest generation because we expect more from technology and less from people. Jen Twenge, professor of psychology at San Diego State University, wrote the book iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. And in this book, she argues and lays out the research that shows that mental health issues and suicide are increasing. Jonathan Haidt wrote the book The Anxious Generation, where he talked about and showed, again, studies and data and research showing that suicide and self-harm are on the rise. He also wrote an article, talked about the dangerous experiment on teen girls, where he lays out how actually Instagram is worse for teen girls, where he says, you have this general, how does technology affect people? And he goes, well, that's too broad because there's a lot of technologies and there's a lot of different kinds of people. But if you narrow it down to teenage girls and Instagram, calls it the dangerous experiment. Or Nicholas Carr wrote the book The Shallows, what the internet is doing to our brains. And what he talks about there is just that their internet is changing and shaping our brain to where our brain is demanding to be fed. And so here's just a few examples of some of the recently published books and articles and people doing research that are showing that this is a big issue that we have to take seriously and we need to think well about. And so that is why I'm here, and that is why I want to talk to you about this topic. My name is Ryan Pauly, and this is the show Think Well, the show that is designed to train you to think well about the Christian faith and the culture so that you can engage the culture well and hopefully think biblically about these issues. Now, this is the next part of the culture series as I'm walking through this book this year. What do I say when? A Parent's Guide to Navigating Cultural Chaos for Children and Teens by Andrew and Christian Walker. And this has been, it's 10 chapters. We are on chapter 8. There's 2 more chapters left, plus one that I skipped. So about 3 more shows left in the culture series, hopefully kind of giving you a biblical perspective on these different cultural issues, specifically parents with children, but these are biblical issues that hopefully anyone can take seriously. So what I want to do in today's show is I'm going to be walking through the points that they make in their chapter. I'm going to then be laying out some content that I give in my talk on technology, walking through how do we place technology within the biblical worldview and the biblical meta-narrative of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, which they talk about a little bit here. I'll give a little bit more in depth. And then I want to give you some practical next steps on what to do. And then I want to finish that as soon as I possibly can because I've been gone for 3 weeks. I'm excited to be back with all you, and I want to take your calls and your questions. So the link is there in the live chat. You can post your questions with a Q, and I will get to those as I can. If it's relevant to the topic, I'll address it as I'm going. If it's kind of off topic, that's fine, but I'll just get to it after the teaching, or you can use the link to call into the show. Look forward. So technology today, next week, again, this little tiny TGC hard question series. I got a bunch of these little books. And then it's fun little fill-in conversations and topics. So I threw out a little poll. What topic do you want to see next on the show? And this one received the most votes. What does depression mean for my faith? So that is going to be the topic next year of looking at depression and the Christian faith. As I said, next week. And then the week after that is going to be on political thought, the next part of our worldview series. And then I'm off to Utah for the last Maven trip of the summer, and I'll be gone, but then back in October for more shows. So I don't think I have more announcements. So let's jump into this chapter. So if you guys have been following along in this book study, again, I love these chapters. They're short, they're simple, and they kind of get to the point. But Andrew Christian Walker, again, Andrew Walker is a PhD from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, is Associate Professor of Christian Ethics and Public Theology at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and a Fellow of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. His wife, Christian Walker, is an accomplished curriculum writer, elementary school educator, and former children's ministry leader. And so kind of bridging that gap of ethics and public policy with children and curriculum, really trying to create a resource that helps parents walk through these issues. So in their chapter on technology, right, they just start off with the facts of what I just started with, pointing out to the reality of what technology is doing and how it is shaping our culture, and how they talked about the studies are showing and the results are staggering that usage correlated with increased depression and anxiety. And so, excuse me. So we are seeing something here that should cause everyone or anyone listening to go, hold on a second, let me think about this a little bit deeper. And that is the main point that they tried to get away here. And I want to say it clearly here at the beginning as and as we walk through the show. And here it is. He says, the most important lesson that we want to draw out in this chapter is simple. Carelessness toward technology will see you and your household swept up in its power. If there are any call to action that we want to convey in this chapter, it is the importance of active engagement with your child or family's technology use. And that's the big thing I want to say here too, is this is not a run from technology, flee, it is so bad, but it is a recognition that it has a shaping power. And therefore, we should not be careless. We should not be adopting it without thinking. We need to think well about all things, especially thinking well about technology. Let me show you a quick quote. This is John Dyer. He wrote a book, The Garden and the City, or something of that nature. From the garden to the city. And here's what he has to say about technology. Whenever we use tools, whether shovels or books to phones or virtual reality, regardless of whether we use them for good or evil, the act of using them forms us physically, mentally, spiritually, relationally. This is the true fact of reality, is that all technology is shaping us in ways that are changing us spiritually, physical, because it's a tool, right? Technology is a tool that we use. And there's lots of different kinds of technology. There's information technology, there's artificial intelligence, there's simple technologies like shovels and hammers. But all technology is a tool that we use to impact reality. Because we use tools to shape reality, it's changing reality. Because it's a tool that we touch and we have in our hands, it's changing us. Right? A simple shovel or hammer, as you dig holes, you're changing the dirt, you're changing the earth, but it's also getting your heart rate up. It's maybe causing blisters to form on your hands as you get the exercise. And so it has a shaping power on you as well. And so that's the big thing that they're trying to get across here. And what I want to try to help you see is the incredible impact that technology has on us, how we can place it within a biblical worldview to use it well, and then give you some practical tips as you move forward. So, as always, in this chapter, they give a biblical teaching overview. And in this chapter, they lay out 4 biblical points that they think are the most important that we should understand. And so I'll just walk through these quickly, and then I'll get to my content, and we'll take your questions and calls. Number one is they said that technology is an instrument of common grace. All right. So common grace, there's God's saving grace that is given to those who are saved, and those who are not saved don't have that saving grace. God's common grace is God's grace that he gives to everybody. The fact that we live in a world that God has created where there's rain and there's tree and there's growth and there's food and there's joy and pleasures and happiness. This is God's common grace that he gives to all people. And so they make the argument that technology is an instrument of common grace, that God, through his grace, is giving us examples or giving us the ability to be part of his creation and to impact and influence his creation in positive ways. They say here, God in essence gives us the raw materials to shape us and tells us to shape and mold them toward culturally beneficial ends. And so that's a big question to ask when it comes to technology is, are we using these tools in culturally beneficial ways? What is the ends of our technology use? And this is something that God has given us. to benefit culture, to bring joy to culture, to bring healing to culture, to bring good things to culture. And therefore, this is his instrument of common grace. I mean, simply put, go to a hospital. Look at the incredible amount of technology that is inside hospitals that is bringing healing to all sorts of people, not just Christians, but Christians and whatever a person's belief is, they can receive healing from the technologies there. And so this would be an example of God's common grace, of his goodness poured out on all people through using technology well. And so their first point here in recognizing that this is part of God's common grace, this is not an evil, broken part of reality that Christians should reject. This is a good part of reality, part of God's common grace. They make the point here on number one, rather than adopting a separatist mindset that views technology as inherently corrupting, the Bible views technology as an outgrowth of human creativity that can be used for both good and sinful purposes. And so hopefully this is something that you don't just say, run far, far, far away, but you recognize the incredible power that this has. Now, to my comments that I made at the beginning, Mears, good to see you here. As always, it's been a while since I've been here, not since you have. Mears says, correlation is not causation. When I'm depressed, I use technology to escape and avoid. It's not technology that causes depression, but depression that causes technology use. So I think that there's a cycle. But here's the reality, is that the leading researchers are showing a correlation between increased technology use and depression rising. And that research shows that when you take phones away from high school students for a period of time, happiness and joy and relational things come back. And so, you can look at psychology and sociology. Sherry Turkle is doing this at MIT. And they hired her specifically as a professional psychologist to do what is the psychology of technology. She's working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she's shown that this is the loneliest generation because of our use with technology. So there's absolutely a correlation between increased social media use, increased technology use, and the rise of depression, anxiety, and these sort of things. And I mean, I don't know what else to say. I don't have the studies right here in front of me, but I've read the studies, I've looked at the studies, and they factor everything they possibly can to show, no, this is a causation, like this is what is causing it, not just simply correlation. I think I was switching those. At the same time, we do recognize when people are depressed, then their technology use goes up as well, because we use technology to escape the problems of reality. And so there is kind of this spiral looping effect that is involved. But people, the studies show and the data indicates that when people get off of social media, off of technology, mental health does improve. And so, and that's again, why there's tons of books, as I just mentioned, from non-Christian. None of the authors that I read at the beginning, Jen Twenge, Sherry Turkle, Jonathan Haidt, Carr, what was it? I forget his first name. None of those are Christians. So this is not just a Christian thing. These are professors and sociologists and psychologists that are out there in the working world and universities who are recognizing and doing the research and showing that there is an actual causation here that is taking place. So point number one in the book, technology is an instrument of common grace. Number two, technology on its own is about how it is used, not only whether it is used. And so they talk about this idea that ever since the invention of the wheel, technology has afforded its users the ability to streamline, simplify, and create. What that means is that the moral worth of any technological instrument is determined by how it's used. And so they're arguing here that, the moral worth is how it's used. And in a sense, it's not just if you use it, the wheel can be used for good or for bad. And so that's why I think we have to recognize first and foremost, he says, Christian wisdom about technology must take into consideration what we're using our technology for. And I want to take us a step further, because I think this is how I started with the John Dyer quote. And if you want, I can throw it back up here if you're just joining me here in a second. John Dyer is going to argue whether you use it for good or evil, the act of using it forms us physically, mentally, spiritually, and relationally. And so we have to recognize it's not just simply whether you use it for good or bad, but the mere fact that we use it is shaping us, is changing us, and has an impact on us, whether good or bad. And so again, just like a shovel, you can dig a hole and you can bury some flowers and plant some flowers, or you can dig a hole and bury a dead body. You can use that shovel for good or bad. The fact that you are using a shovel has a physical impact on you as it builds up your calluses on your hands and your blood, heart rate and all that kind of stuff. And so it has this impact. But we do have to recognize the big question with technology is also, what do we use it for? He says here, if you're an adult who insists on technology's presence throughout every area of your life, have you considered whether it's an impediment too? This, I think, is fascinating. And I encourage you, stop with me for a second and think about this as I stopped it when I was reading it. Have you thought about, we often think about how good it is, how wonderful it is, and how it's helping and streamlining and all sorts of good things. But have you stopped and considered if technology is an impediment as well? They say here, if you're a parent, would you rather engage your child's attentions or have a tablet do so? Would you rather engage your child's attentions or have a tablet do so? Now, please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying this is the 100% either or. You never, ever, ever, ever give your child a tablet or you're giving it to them all the time. But it's very easy. I know as a parent of a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, it is very easy to hand a child technology and say, here, distract yourself because I need some peace and quiet. And sometimes that is absolutely necessary. The question is, am I doing that when I shouldn't be? Am I doing that when I shouldn't be? There's like really funny reels on Instagram that always pop up of like when it's like the caption will say like when you're trying to raise a child, a screenless child, and they're like in a restaurant and the child's like climbing on the dad's head and everything. He's trying to have a conversation. Like, that's a true reality that I get faced with a lot, is that, man, I'm trying to raise screenless kids. I'm trying to keep them away from the screen as much as possible. And it turns into like, I can't just sit and have a adult conversation sometimes. It's like, maybe I can watch the kids while my wife does, or my wife can watch the kids while I do. Or when we were at Summit for the last 2 weeks, my dad would watch the kids so that we could have conversations with students. Sometimes you can get that break. But if you're trying to say, no, I want to give my child's attention, not just simply have a tablet do so, it definitely takes an effort. And so this is something just to stop and just cause us to not say it's all evil, throw it away, but to say, let me just think well about this. Let me actually not be careless about this and think about the habits that I have developed. Am I too quick to give my kids a phone? Am I too quick to get on my own phone? I know this is my fault, is that I'm very quick to get on my phone and check YouTube comments and see what things are going on and respond to people when I probably should be dealing and spending time with my kids in that moment. And that's where we have to have others in our life that keep us accountable, that can see how we spend our time and say, hey, you spent a lot of time on that device. Hey, maybe let's take a break. Let's move over here. And so the second point they make is that on its own, it's about how it's used, not just whether it's used, but we do have to recognize that how we use it has a big effect on us in all ways. Number three that they make here in this book, what do I say when, is that we are affective beings, not just relational beings. Now, what do they mean here? He says, what you put in, you get out. You may have heard this before. People say this all the time. Whatever you put in, you're going to get out of it. And what the point is that they're making is that they think that this is attached to Matthew 12:34 and 35, which says, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. Now, they comment on this and say, while humans are thinking beings, we are also deeply feeling beings too. Our emotions and our desires can be shaped consciously or unconsciously by what we ingest, consume, or familiarize ourselves with over time. Right? This is something that all of us should be able to be like, yeah, absolutely, that's true. That our emotions and our desires are shaped by what we ingest. We can actually develop desires for goodness, and we can develop desires for badness. We can develop a taste for beauty, or we can develop a taste for ugliness. We can develop a taste for truth, and we can develop a taste for lies, where lies actually can become attractive to us and desirable to us rather than truth. And so we have to recognize that our desires, our emotions can be shaped consciously or unconsciously by these things. And therefore, we have to take this into account and recognize that we are affective beings. He says, consider your phone for an example. How many of us relationally evaluate our decision to pick up our phones and scroll versus picking up our phone out of an automated muscle memory? That's a tough question, because I know maybe I'm the one bad person here, or the one person that has no control over my devices here, but I know a lot of times that my phone is checked. It's out of muscle memory. It's like the moment there's a quiet space, the moment there's a downtime, the moment there's something that is weird, it's like, hey, grab my phone, start scrolling. Versus like, no, I'm actually making a conscious choice that this is the right thing to do at this moment. And so their point, again, re-emphasizing what they keep talking about throughout this chapter, is that we must be deeply discerning, intentional, and discriminating of the media and technology that we consume. Because we know that what we consume shapes us, we also have to recognize then that we have to be discerning of what we consume. This is one thing I teach in my entertainment talk when I talk to students, and I just gave this talk a couple of weeks ago at Summit, is that we have to learn how to discern. We actually have to desire truth, goodness, and beauty, and then discern between what is true and false, good and bad, beautiful and ugly, and then actually begin to have our desires shaped, or we desire that which is true, good, and beautiful. And so that's hopefully the key that you're getting through in this conversation so far, is be discerning, be thoughtful, be considerate of what you are doing and how you are using this technology. Their fourth and final point, I'm trying to go somewhat quickly to get to your calls and questions. Technology cannot replace reality. Now, I think this is something that virtually everyone would agree with and say, absolutely. However, sometimes our habits do not actually reflect that truth, that we know that technology cannot replace reality. He says, of all of us are enfleshed persons meant to live alongside one another in our embodiment, and not merely in a disembodied state where our interactions are online. The offer of endless online euphoria robs us of the deeper connections that we are meant to experience in the bodies God has given us. Digital community cannot replace real life community. And I think we all recognize that to be true. However, one of the very common things that people go through is recognizing the understanding of community has changed. Community is no longer the people that are around us, the people that we interact with face to face, but my community is the one that's online. It's my friend group or whatever group. And it's like, look, that's amazing. As someone who doesn't live close to my immediate family, my wife's family is close. My immediate family does not even live in the state. Online FaceTime and phone calls and texts are really amazing. It's a God-given gift that I can connect with my parents and my siblings and family who live in other places. However, if the only community and interaction I have with people is through online forums and chats and phone calls, then we miss something really significant of the fact that we are embodied beings, and that being embodied in the presence of others is really important. And so that's why they make this fourth and final point, that technology cannot replace reality. Now, as they often do, then they kind of summarize where they say, okay, here are the biblical principles, biblical, theological, and philosophical principles that every parent should know, especially Christian parents, that every Christian parent should know. Here they are. And then Johnny, I'll get to your questions that you put here. Number one, technology's value is measured by whether it's pointing us to God and His Word or away from it. Number two, technology can be used for good or for bad. 3, technology should be seen as a gift to build civilization and provide better controls around safeguarding life. 4, technology cannot remove humanity's greatest problem, sin. No amount of technology will be adequate as the all-sufficient balm that we often view it to be. Now, that's one I want to stop at here really quickly because there's actually books. I'm going to pull up a quote here really quickly by Yuval Noah Harari, where he believes this, right? This idea, he says, don't think of death as a metaphysical mystery. And they certainly don't view death as a source of life's meaning. Rather, for modern people, death is a technical problem that we can and should solve. See, the Christian view here is that technology cannot remove humanity's greatest problem, which is sin. Yuval Harari is saying, no, it's not about sin. That's not our problem. Our problem is not death. Our problem is just a technical problem. And therefore, it's a technical problem. It's something that can and should be solved with technology. John Lennox, professor from Oxford University, responds to this and says, all of this means that Christians need to think hard about the implications of the fundamental Christian doctrines of the resurrection of Jesus and return of Christ for AI and the race to create Homo Deus. That was Yuval Harari's book, is Homo Deus, that we actually will become gods, that through the process of evolution and transhumanism, that we actually will become gods. Lennox continues, for if the Christian teaching is true, the race to conquer death as a technical problem will prove to be ultimately futile. Although the technology developed along the way may help ease old age and solve many outstanding ethical problems. And so that's the point that they're making here, is that technology can never remove humanity's greatest problem, which is sin. No amount of technology will be adequate as the all-sufficient balm that we often view it to be. Next, 3 more. Christians should adopt neither an instinctual rejection nor an instinctual acceptance of technology. All parents must examine, study, and plan for how their children will use technology. Next, a child's interaction with technology should not be with an off-on switch, but a dimmer switch. Children need to slowly adjust to technology available to them, not simply be thrown into the deep end to find out for themselves. And lastly, a Christian source. Our source of Christian witness in society we live in today is to prevent our Christian homes from falling prey to the temptation to isolate ourselves in order to let technology entertain us individually, often in separate rooms or in separate devices. The family itself must confront technology by how technology is impacting the family itself, not just individuals. I want to hit on that last part of the Christian witness. And then I want to jump to your questions. And then I want to walk through kind of placing technology in the biblical metanarrative and get to some practicals, and hopefully last like 10 or so minutes. But John Dyer, again, in his book, From the Garden to the City, look at what he wrote. And I'm curious if you Christians would agree with this. Here's what he says. Spiritual depth requires the ability to pray for more than a few minutes, to memorize and meditate on scripture, not search for it online, and to love God with our hearts and minds. This means that we must be careful to cultivate and retain the skill of deeply reading and sincerely contemplating the things of God, something that attention-getting technologies do not value. He goes on and writes this. Faithfulness also requires that we can sit with a person and deeply listen without being distracted by a phone or wearable. There may be no greater Christian witness in our time than someone who can truly master the art of listening well in an age of constant interruptions. Isn't that so true? I don't know about you guys, but it's easy to get really frustrated by how often we get interrupted. And I know it's frustrating how often I get interrupted. And saying, if we want to be Christian witnesses in this world that is not just being shaped by technology like everybody else, does it actually mean developing habits and values and disciplines that actually go against what the attention-getting technologies often prioritize, and developing the ability to listen well, to sit with people without being distracted? That is so huge. All right, so let me jump to your questions. A few have come in. I see there with a Q. So again, if you're just joining the stream, post a Q before a question. I'll get to it. Or you can use the link to call in here in a little bit as I walk through the rest of this content. Johnny says, this question is about me personally. If I claim to love Jesus, and I absolutely do, why do I continue to fall into the same sin? How can I claim to love? Okay, so that's a great question. That is a little bit off topic. So let me actually save that, Johnny. Actually, let me just answer this really quickly. Look, I deal with the same thing. And this is a common conversation with me and my wife where it's like, it's so frustrating. Like, I've created these habits of how I act, of how I interact, of what I do that is hard to break. And I often point back to like Paul, where it's like, I do what I don't want to do because of the sin that's in me, but the things I want to do, I don't do. And so it's frustrating. And so I think that the question that I often come back to is, if I claim to love Jesus, why do I continue to fall into the same sin? I think those are two different questions. The question of, if I claim to love Jesus, then the question is, how do you respond to your sin? Right? So if I love my parents, I may disobey them and I may disobey. But the question is, when you disobey and you recognize that you've disobeyed, what is your response? Is your response, whatever, doesn't matter, I don't care, I still love you guys, what are you talking about, I don't love you? And do you get defensive? Do you push back? Do you justify your disobedience as being okay? Or do you say, Mom, Dad, I messed up, I'm so sorry, I don't want to do this, help me? And then you're actually repentant. I think that's the difference. If you love Jesus, then often there is a repentant attitude that we have when it comes to these sort of sins, even if they are sins that are repeated more than once or that keep happening. It keeps happening, fall in the same sin. Or is the response, I keep doing the same sin and I don't care? Now, I don't think that's your response, because you're asking me this question of saying, man, if I claim to love Jesus, why do I keep doing this? Like, it is a concerning question to you, which I think shows a genuineness of your love. Now, the follow-up then is to say, look, some sins we keep falling into because of habits, because of situations. There's a lot of different reasons that we can fall into the same sin. And then the question is, what are we doing to change it? Are we actually being accountable to it? Right? So if it's, things that we look on, we're talking about technology in this show, right? So if we're looking at like online stuff, pornography, are you putting blockers on phones? Are you controlling when or where a person, uses a device? Are there actually steps being changed? Or do we say, man, I'm so sorry, God, help me change, but then we actually don't make any choices that are different? And I know this is something that I'm trying to do with some of my habits that I have that I don't like, of how I engage, is saying, hey, how can I actually make different choices? How can I have things on my mind? How can I bring people into this conversation? How can I be thoughtful with this to actually start to affect those pathways that habits sometimes create in our brain to make and do something different? And so I think that's where I would say, I think these are two different questions, because the one is like, why do I keep doing the same sin? And part of it is because of sin and temptation and habits and things like that. And we have to figure out how to make those changes and be accountable and bring people into our life and things like that. But I don't think that's necessarily an indication of a lack of love of Jesus. I think the love of Jesus sometimes comes out in how do we respond to that sin? Do we justify it? Do we defend it? Or are we repentant of it, recognizing that it's part of brokenness? So I think that's kind of how I hopefully would address that, and hopefully that is helpful to you. Mirza asked the question, are you saying that if technology discovers immortality, that would prove Christianity false? I pause here because I want to say, that's not what I'm trying to say. So people think, so here's what I'm pausing and processing through. Yuval Harari's book argues that it's only a technological problem. Therefore, technology should some point become good enough to actually solve that problem. And that's where the Christian worldview would strongly disagree. Now, the question is, I don't think it's, so in that sense, like, yes, if we can like solve one problem, yeah, that would push against Christianity, or saying it's not a technical issue, I guess, in a sense. But the other issue is, it's not just immortality. We recognize, sin is death. So I guess there is a mortality component there. So maybe, but the question is how are we living? And are we living in the way that we were designed and created to live? Or if we somehow figure out, and I don't think that we will, because our consciousness is not physical, and so I don't think it can be transferred and downloaded onto a computer to then live forever. But if we somehow figure out how to like engineer, I don't even know, I'm trying to process through a scenario where this could be possible, but like engineer humans to somehow get them to live forever. If we're continuing to live forever, but we're in separation from God, then we haven't solved the problem. Because the problem is sin. Yes, it's death, but it's also sin, and sin is a separation from God. And so I don't see how technology could actually overcome the separation from God. Maybe we get to a point where Christianity is proven false, but there's no way, if Christianity is true, that technology somehow will get us forgiven from our sins and get people into a right relationship with God without Jesus Christ. And so that's where I would say simply making us immortal wouldn't prove Christianity false, because it's not just about immortality. It's about It's about forgiveness from sin. It's the death and resurrection of Jesus to reconcile us back to God, not simply how can we somehow download consciousness to get ourselves to live forever. If that forever is still separated from God, we haven't solved the problem. So I think there's a couple problems there that I'm kind of processing through on the spot with you all. But I think that's a really good question. What Yuval Harari, though, is arguing is that, yes, because Christianity is not true, this is not a sin issue. This is not a metaphysical issue. This is not a spiritual issue. This is just technical. And therefore, technology should be able to discover it. From a Christian view, as we would say, no, it's not a technical problem. Therefore, technology will not solve it. And therefore, our attempt to get technology to solve the sin issue is always going to fall short. And so that's where the contrast in this debate really is. I think that Johnny's question was that he was promised that religion would free him from sin, but didn't. Well, if that is what Johnny was promised, then the religion made a false promise. There is nowhere in Scripture that says if you become a Christian and accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, you will never sin again. We are in the process of sanctification, of becoming more like Jesus Christ until our death, where then we are glorified and brought into right relationship with Him. And so, if that's what actually took place, and that Johnny was promised that becoming a Christian would completely free him from sin, then I think that he was made a false promise, and that's not what Scripture teaches. Alrighty, I think those are the cues that I see, and so I'm going to pause there as far as questions. I'm going to jump back to my content. So how do we place technology within a biblical context of creation, fall, redemption, restoration? Here's a few things, and I'm going to go quickly. And again, if you want some ask for the questions, I'd be happy to take your calls and questions on these points. So number one, as we already kind of talked about, technology is a good gift. That is how we should see it. This is a gift from God in order for us to use and steward and benefit and bless the creation that we live in. We all should recognize that God is the creator. It's not us. We are not the ones ultimately in charge. God created us and then gave us the ability to create. And so if we somehow get the view that we are the ones in charge, we have it all, we can do whatever we want because we are the ultimate authority, then we will miss the fact that the Scripture is very clear that God created and then gave us the authority to create and steward His creation. And that should not be missed with technology sometimes making us feel like we are often more powerful than we really are. Next, I would say that we have to recognize within the biblical story that humans are set apart, that there's something unique about us, that we are not just physical things and we're not animals. There's us created in the image of God. I've talked a lot about this on the show in past weeks. And this is actually part of a chapter that I'm currently writing for a book that will hopefully be published soon, Stewarding Artificial Intelligence, Faithfully Using Creation Resources. It was supposed to be published last year. We hit some delays, needed some more chapters, and that's why I'm co-authoring a new chapter on a philosophy of technology, which pretty much spends the entire chapter arguing how humans are different at a philosophical, metaphysical level than technology and physical stuff. So I'm not going to go into all those details now, but hopefully that book will come out soon. Next, we recognize in the biblical story, after creation, God rested, right? This is the doctrine of creation. The first part of the story, creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Creation teaches us good gift. God created, humans are created as set apart, and God rested. And so the question is, do we ever rest from our technology use? Do we ever take a break? Do we ever just put the phone aside and be like, I'm not going to respond? And I try my best I have social media blocked on the weekends, Saturday, Sunday, no social media. I have email blocked on Sundays because it's like, I don't even want to get work emails on Sunday on my phone. Do we ever take time to just rest, take a break? Or are we constantly plugged in? I remember when I was in college, I graduated 2010, so this would have been around 2008, a professor asking our class, how often are you within 3 feet of your phone? And this is like right when like iPhones came out. I didn't even have an iPhone yet. It was like rare, at least in my friend group, to have iPhones. But when they first like came out, and even then it was like 24 hours a day. I'm within 3 feet of my phone. Why? Because I wake up in the morning, I stick it in my pocket. It's with me all day long. And when I go to bed, I plug it in next to my head on the nightstand and it sits there all night. It's 24 hours a day. And so unless we've made intentional efforts to do something different, I can imagine anything being changed, that we're not actually taking a break or resting from creation. We also then have to recognize that there's the fall in the creation story, creation, fall. In the fall, Adam and Eve, what was the temptation? Satan's temptation is that you will be like God. And so we have this desire to become like God, and technology has given us the allure that with the right tools, we can take this broken world and mold it into a better one that is according to our desire. And so this, I think, is an issue that we have to reconcile, is that there's a fallen, broken world that we live in, and I've talked about here a little bit as well. In the redemption part of the Christian story, we recognize, as I've talked about, God is the one who has overcome death, not humans. And so again, this is not about us trying to figure out what advances can we make, what can we do in order to overcome death and this problem of sin and brokenness that we got ourselves into, but recognizing that it's through Jesus Christ that we ultimately are saved, redeemed, and all of creation, including technology, will be restored. And we see technology used in the biblical story, from the Tower of Babel used wrongly to the ark. The ark is a form of technology used to show the salvation that God brings to people. And so it's in the story and plays a significant role. And so we have to recognize that. So last part here, and then I'm going to get back to your questions and your calls. How should we respond? Here's just some quick practical tips. Again, I'm going to fly through this. If you want to talk more about any of these, I'd be happy to spend more time in the show, but I want to get to your calls and questions. And so let me just give some practical tips for those who want them. So how do we respond? Number one, ask questions. So asking, what is this technology doing for me? And is this something that it should do for me? Or is this something I should actually do myself? Number two, what is it doing to me? How is it shaping me? Is it shaping my attitude or affections or emotions or desires? What is this doing to me? How is it shaping reality? How is the mere existence of this technology actually affecting relationships in the world and community around us? How am I using it? There's the am I using it for good or bad question. And then how is this affecting my view of God? I think these are just a few questions that are helpful in saying, Kate, as I adopt new technology use, I want to ask some questions to just be thoughtful, right? That was the whole point of this chapter. Again, how did they say it at the very beginning? The beginning of the chapter says, carelessness toward technology will see you and your household swept up in its power. So we don't want to be careless. We want to be thoughtful and just like, hey, what is this doing to me? How is it shaping me? Okay, not in a negative way. Okay, cool. Let's move forward, or let's figure out how to use this well. So I think asking good questions is the first place to start. Number two, I think we should think ethically about our technology. For example, like think about the ethics that are programmed into products, right? The programmers are reflected, the ethics of programmers are reflected in products. So any product you get has been programmed. That programming has sort of ethical questions and barriers built in. I mean, a silly example, but one I think that can be very clear is like self-driving cars are programmed to spot things on the road and make the car turn as needed. And so the question is like, well, if there's a bunny in one lane and a baby in another lane, that car has to be programmed. Okay, if it has to hit one, what's it going to do? And we often don't even think about how these things are programmed. I remember talking to a software salesman, a guy who sold the software the company created. And I said, okay, what software do you sell? And he said, we sell software that provides or puts on ethical barriers for machine learning software that other companies create. So it's like, okay, some other company creates some machine learning system, and then their software is installed to put some ethical barriers and boundaries to keep the machine learning from going too far. So I was very intrigued, and I said, oh, who sets those ethical boundaries? And he goes, well, not us. Every company can set whatever boundaries they want. And so that's the point. Is that yes, boundaries are being set. The question is, why are they where they are? And have we actually stopped to think about the ethics that are reflected in the programming of the products that we use? Number two, what are you sharing online? Right? This is a big thing of not only information and data, but are you sharing to get people to go, wow, you're amazing? Are you sharing to uplift and encourage? Are you sharing to, why are you putting the things that you are putting online? Number three, this is like with ChatGPT. Is it a tool helping you create, doing the thing that God has created you to do, or is it creating for you? Now, again, not all creating for you is evil, but I think this is a helpful question to at least start to say, okay, is this actually doing something I should be doing? Right? A simple example is if a teacher asks you to write a paper, guess what? You got to write the paper, and having AI write the paper for you is cheating. You're saying, here's my work, and it's not your work. This is something that computers produce. And so, this is a question of saying, hey, is it a tool creating for you? Are you creating? And is it possible that if we use AI to do all the creation for us, if we were created to create, and therefore then we're never doing what we were created to do, we are giving up our God-given mandate to create and create good things. Now, again, that doesn't mean like never have a factory where it's like, oh, the moment you have some factory where machines are building cars, now you're giving up. It's like, no, like there's ways in which technology absolutely is shaping industries and shaping how we do things. But there still is a creative aspect to us. And so there's just some simple things to kind of be thinking through. Man, is this doing something that I should be doing? Or is this something that it's okay for this to do because I don't need to be doing this and I can actually spend my time doing something better or something more productive? Lastly, are you actually thinking of true human flourishing? And thinking ethically of how do we use this? Are we using it to help humans flourish, or are we using it to actually, how we're using it actually harming humanity? Number 3, think about personal containment. So this is actually, I kind of stole this from Mustafa Suleyman's book on the coming wave, where he talks a lot about containment. And he says, we have a containment problem. And he walks through a lot of points on what he thinks the containment problem is and why it's a problem. And I would say, look, yeah, he says like, containment's not even possible. Like once technology gets out there, you can't stop it. You can't even try to contain it. And so that's why I kind of responded. I said, no, I think he's right. Therefore, there has to be some personal containment. So what is some steps on personal containment? Number 1, you should form your convictions and your values first, meaning what is important to you, what is valuable. Form that first through scripture rather than what does technology say is valuable. So again, technology, because it's created. This is a part of a chapter I wrote also for the book on stewarding artificial intelligence. Technology is creating to make life easier, to make life more productive, to make life faster, to help out in all these ways. Sometimes we can start to see that as the highest value. The highest value is ease, or the highest value is convenience, or the highest value is productivity, rather than recognizing those are good things to be productive and have things be easier. But those are not the highest values if we're losing relational opportunities in the midst of it. And so we need to form our values and convictions first. We also need to live productive lives of not falling into laziness. This is like the movie Pauly created this dystopian world, right? Where technology becomes everything and starts doing everything. And then every person just gets super, super overweight and literally cannot even stand or do anything themselves because technology does everything. And that's like an extreme dystopian world. But it's interesting that Pauly brings up on that idea of like, hey, if technology gets to the point where it's doing everything for us, how exactly are we being productive? We want to have wisdom and virtue guide us. And I think this is a big point that John Dyer talks about, is technology being for the table. And what he means by that is that we are created for relationships. We are created for face-to-face interactions with human beings where we relate emotionally and deeply with people. So how can you use technology for the table to get people to the table metaphorically into conversation, into relationship, into community, where maybe you look at someone's Instagram, see their vacation they just went on, and then you use your phone to text them and say, wow, I just saw your pictures. I'd love to hear more about it. Why don't you come over for dinner? And we'd love to treat you for dinner because, hey, you just got back from vacation. You probably haven't gone grocery shopping. You could use a meal. We would love to have you, or send a meal to you, whatever. And you now use technology of Postmates to send meals. I mean, this is my family's sick right now. And people have been doing this, and it's an incredible blessing to use technology to bless people in a time of need. And so that's something to think about, is how am I using this for the table or to benefit the human interactions that we have? Last thing I'll just mention here is understanding mediums. One thing that I think is true, and I put here, is that less effort means less meaning. Sometimes newer technologies make things or allow things to require less effort. Things require less effort now, but that's also less meaningful. So again, an illustration would be someone buys you a birthday gift and they drop it off at your house, and it's something super meaningful and special, and you respond with a text that says thank you. It's like super quick, easy, very little effort, not meaningful at all. A little bit more effort would be what? Doing a phone call, and you call them up and say, oh my goodness, I got your gift. Thank you so much. How special, how many, and that is going to be more meaningful to them because it requires a little bit more effort to pick up a phone call or to pick up a phone and make a call than it does to send out a text that says, thank you. Well, what's a little bit more effort? Well, sometimes a handwritten card. You ever gotten a handwritten thank you card in the mail for someone that gave you a gift? Like that is a lot more meaningful because you recognize the time that took to put into it. So this is something to think about, is that newer technologies often make things easier and therefore require less effort. We have to stop for a second and say, hey, sometimes less effort means less meaning. And therefore, sometimes we want to revert back to an older medium, right? So medium being, instead of a text to communicate, you use a letter to communicate, you use a card to communicate, and that then conveys a greater meaning. We also have to recognize mediums can make something either inviting or isolating. So music, for example, you have a concert that invites people together and you enjoy something together, and it has this community aspect as the community comes together to listen to the music. Or in the summer, the park near our house will have community movie nights where they have a big old screen in the park and families and everyone comes together and watches a movie together. That's an inviting aspect. Now, an isolating medium is you have music, but instead of listening at a concert, you listen on your AirPods. And so you walk around town with your AirPods in. That now sends out the message of an isolating message of now, hey, don't talk to me. I'm busy. I'm listening to something. Don't interrupt, versus you're inviting people in. Same thing sometimes when we just watch a movie on our device, it's like, hey, don't talk to me. I'm busy. And that same movie or the same music, the medium that you use, whether it's a concert, a big screen TV, or a phone or AirPods, can have an isolating or an inviting message. Lastly, the mediums can shape whether something is relational or observational. And so the big question here is, are you using entertainment for relationships, or are you simply using it to observe people's lives? And I know it's easy sometimes on social media that you sit there and you observe a whole bunch of people's lives that you're not actually in relationship with. Old friends, and that's nice to see what old friends are doing. But the question is, have you ever seen what an old friend is doing? You see their post on social media and you go, wow, I haven't talked to them for a long time. Let me pick up the phone and give them a phone call and see how they're doing. And so hopefully we recognize that sometimes the mediums in which we use, the social media we use, can lend to a very much observational life where we observe what other people are doing rather than a relational life. So those are my practical tips on how to respond. Put it up there one more time. Ask questions, think ethically, personal containment, understand the mediums. These are ways to just be thoughtful, to think well about technology and figure out how do we use this to really provide the best for others, for ourselves, to use it in a God-glorifying way. So hopefully the biblical principles in our chapter here, walking through how it fits in the biblical story, as well as the personal things, can kind of give you some ways to move forward with technology use. So with that, let me jump to the live chat. Again, if you have a call, use the link that I tagged or pinned at the top of the live chat to call into the show. The lines are open, but otherwise I'm going to walk through your live chat questions until calls come in. You know, I didn't finish reading this whole thing. The Last Redbender, good to see you here, man. The other factor is how many jobs now require AI use or are being replaced with AI automation. Consumption isn't the only potential issue correlating with increased depression. That's true. So I forget if I have the quote here, but Mustafa Suleiman, actually, I think it's on my other one, if I can pull it up here for a second. Suleiman argues, I changed my slides. Do I have it here? I don't think I have it here. Suleiman argues that like AI is like the new electricity, like it's literally in everything and powers everything. And so there's no getting away from it. And so absolutely it's required usage or replaced. I don't know about you guys, but I know that sometimes it's frustrating. My family's been sick. I tried calling this medical clinic just yesterday, and I could not get away from the automation. It was like operator, someone. It's just like more options. If you're a new customer, hit one. If you're this, hit this. If you're this, and I'm just like going through option after option after option. I'm like, can I just talk to someone? I just need to know if you have an available appointment today. Get me off of the automation and give me a human being. It can be frustrating. And so there absolutely is, there's a lot going on here in very deep levels. And so, yeah. Johnny, always good to answer your questions and hopefully give you a few things to think about. Here's another question from Johnny. Do you think people are obsessed with living forever because they refuse to admit that God is real and they'd rather not find out that they're wrong or trying to live forever? I'm looking for a book. I thought it was sitting right here. Oh yeah, it is. It's under my book. That's why I've been seeing it throughout my interview. Immortal by Clay Jones. How the fear of death drives us and what we can do about it. You know, what's interesting is I think it was last year in my book study through Armin Navabi's book, Why There Is No God. He talked about how a lot of people are Christians just because they have this fear of death. And he goes into all these studies that show that people actually have a fear of death that shapes them and changes how they live. I forget exactly the main points that he was making. This is me talking off the top of my head. And I want to say, and I responded in that, and I said, man, I completely agree with this chapter. Absolutely. That studies show that statistically people have a fear of death, and this fear of death drives them to try to figure out how to live forever. And I brought up this book in that show, and I'll have to figure out what exact show it was. And I'll post it up here so it pops up after the fact, after this video is processed. It'll pop up here in the corner. But I walked through this in that show, but Clay Jones, he's a former professor of apologetics at Biola University. That's where I had him as a professor. And he talks about how what he discusses is that everyone has what he calls an immortality project. And he says either through healthy living and medical science, through transhumanism, through cryogenics, everyone has an immortality project, something that they're trying to do to try to live forever. And he talks about maybe it's through procreation. So he says there's literal immortality projects. Like through healthy living, I'm going to live a lot longer, or through medical science, I'm going to be able to live forever, or through transhumanism or cryogenics and freezing myself, I'm going to be able to live forever. So there are literally people out there that are literally trying to live forever and doing whatever they can do to have a literal immortality project. Or he says there are a lot of people that he has what he calls symbolic immortality projects. So this would be through procreation and adoption. Through kids, my name will live on. The Pauly name will live on forever. It's through genealogy research or ancestor research. Maybe it's through heroism or activism. I'm going to do something in the society to where I will be remembered in the history books. I want to make a difference. I'm going to have a building. There's going to be the Ryan Pauly building at some whatever, and therefore everyone will remember me because my name will be placed on a building. He says some people do this through celebrity or fandom. And so there's people want to live in infamy, and so they want to run across the field at a baseball game and jump on the field and go whatever. And so they're going to be remembered. And so this whole book argues and follows statistical research that shows that people really do have this fear of death that often drives their decisions. Not for every single person at every single time, but I think the research does show it. And that then they're trying to solve it through these different immortality projects. He then obviously, then he says some people actually have what he calls mortality mitigation projects, where immortality would be boring. Death is just a necessary thing that has to go on. We just were lucky to be born. Death is nothing. So some people just try to detach themselves from the reality of their own death, and just say, hey, that's a part of life, and they just kind of try to not even think about death because it's a mortality mitigation project. He then obviously shows and tries to go into how the secular forms of salvation have failed us, that there's addictions and meaninglessness and anxiety, depression, psychotics, drugs, suicide, anarchy, a lot of issues. He then walks through the evidence for the resurrection and pointing to true immortality found in Jesus. And so I thought it was really interesting. I mean, the studies that he shows, the quotes that he has, the research that he produces of people saying, here's what I'm trying to do, absolutely lines up with what Armin Navabi in his book talked about, is like, hey, people are afraid of death, and therefore that's why they're going to God, rather than recognizing, hey, not a big, that's just what happens, that's life. And so he would have that mortality mitigation project. I think that's how he addressed in his book. And so I do think that there is this idea, maybe not obsessed with living forever, but I think that there's an obsession of overcoming this reality that we all know that death is 100%, that the one thing that is guaranteed in life is that we all will die. And now what do we do to try to get past that? What do we deal with that reality? And there's a lot of people that take these other immortality projects that are not true immortality. So that's what, hopefully that kind of gives you some thoughts, but I would agree with you that there's definitely, wrong ways that people either try to live forever or deny the reality of living forever is not important. Johnny says, on a side note, it's definitely not what I was promised. So he was never promised, going back a little bit, that becoming a Christian would get rid of all of his sins. Never once has that been said to me, just to be clear. So yeah, he's not been promised, as Mirza maybe thought, that he was promised that sin would go away. Mirza comes back and says, some people seem to think that the internet and free exchange of information is causing people to leave religion. Would you agree? That's part of it. I mean, there's definitely studies. As I looked into deconstruction, there's absolutely information online that people are coming into contact with that is causing them to walk away from faith. It doesn't necessarily lead to that. And so, I mean, there's stories where churches wouldn't let anyone engage with anything like different, like don't read those things, don't even like, there's like, that's just evil, bad, don't, stay away. And then all of a sudden, like, people get introduced to these other ideas, and it's like, wow, this is what you've been scared about, this is what you think is so evil, or what else are you hiding from me? If you didn't want me to know this, what else did you not want me to know? And it absolutely is causing people to walk away from faith. However, I think when done well, that it actually can be a strengthening factor for faith. And this is what my dissertation research is actually on right now, is that when we have the internet, and that's why I do the show the way I do, is I want atheists and skeptics to call in and challenge me. I don't want this just to be an echo chamber where all the Christians go rah, 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 and we all agree with each other and never get introduced to other ideas. But I think that there's also studies that will show that when the internet and free exchange of information is out there and people are able to intellectually engage with the information, that people are seeing the arguments as being really persuasive and coming to faith, and rather than the opposite. And so I think that it's not simply internet and exchange of information is making people leave. I think it's often the attitude in which you present the information, and how you present it and how you actually open people up to it. And so that's why I try to have my show. Obviously, if I thought that having the exchange of information is causing people to leave religion, and then I'm actively inviting atheists to come on my show to give me their other ideas, and that's causing people to leave religion, that probably wouldn't be the smartest thing on my end. But I actually think that this is a strengthening, beneficial activity for everybody, for atheist and Christian, to hear my perspective, to hear the cross-examination, to hear my cross-examination, to hear back and forth, I think is beneficial for everybody. And so that's why I'm trying to keep pressing on and say, hey, let's let all the information out there. Let's give all the data. Let's treat the arguments well, and then let people choose what they choose based on the best available information, rather than siloing them into thinking and isolating them from anything that might disagree. I think that is the most problematic way to go about engaging with information. Back to Johnny. Do you think it's important to allow our children to only consume Christian content online? At what point can and should we introduce them to different ideas? Should they be using technology at all? Now, that I think is a really good question. And I think that is in a sense, age dependent. It changes from person to person. You kind of have to know your child, and how susceptible they are and how willing they are to just go along with people. And maybe some people need to be kind of not isolated, but protected, but to be guarded a little bit longer, because your kid versus, like, hey, my kid can withstand this and they can engage with this. And so, I mean, in leading Maven trips, and we go around the country, I mean, my kids have been going on this trip since they were, I think Lennox went on his first trip when he was like 6 months old. And so he's just growing up, going on these trips and having conversations and seeing atheists come into groups. And now obviously he's only 3 and it doesn't make sense to him. But my nephew, who I think is, sorry if you're watching this, 12. I think, yeah, he's 12. And I brought him on a Maven trip this last summer, where we had atheists from the Boulder atheists come in and speak, and he can engage with that well. And there's good conversations that happen. I think that's one of the big things is, are we allowing the conversation to happen afterwards? Say, hey, we're going to go watch that movie, but let's talk about it. Or do we say, no, you can't watch any movie that might have any or sort of idea that's bad, and we just isolate our kids from it? I don't think that's best. Or do we say, well, I'm going to show them the movie and hope they don't notice these things? Or do we say, hey, let's watch it and let's actually engage thoughtfully and critically with it? But again, if there are some students that I would say probably shouldn't go on these trips because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle themselves. They don't have that maturity. And sometimes it's also just the maturity of like engaging well. So they might get into a conversation and be disrespectful or something of that nature. And so I definitely think that there's age appropriate. I would not stick a 5-year-old on Instagram. Obviously that would be highly inappropriate and problematic. And so I think that there's ways in which we can slowly introduce them and give them slightly more guided freedom to learn, but within having conversations as parents. And so I know, like, for phones, I would push that back to teenage years, maybe even 16 when they're driving, smartphones at least. There's things like that. And I don't have a clear date on every single one of those issues, but I definitely think that it should often be delayed more than we delay it. And maybe if I can say this, and I don't have maybe a lot of data to back this up, but I wonder, here's a question I have. I wonder if there's data to support when students have delayed adoption with technology, if that is harmful in any way. So if there's a student who's in high school that's never been on social media, that doesn't have a smartphone, and they're 16, 17, 18 years old, in what way is that harmful to them? Maybe they're not fully in with all the different conversations and things that are happening. And there's definitely times where, like, you're working, and I know, like, students is like, I need a phone to be able to know my schedule and things like that. Like, there's absolutely necessary components that come into play. But I wonder, like, relationally speaking, how that affects students going the opposite extreme versus we know the effects of giving technology without limit at younger ages. And so I wonder kind of where it is at the other end of that extreme. So definitely think it's age dependent, knowing your student, knowing your person, and then also what sort of content they're engaging with. I think there's definitely content I would not allow someone to engage with. There's content I don't engage with. I don't watch movies or shows that have pornography and sex scenes. Like, it's just not something I want to see. And I know the pitfalls, and I know the struggles that so many people have with pornography. It's like, I'm just not going to mess with that. It's not a movie worth watching. But I can watch clips that have some cursing in it. And again, there's cursing that I don't like, and this is really inappropriate cursing. And then there's a war movie where they're dropping F-bombs. It's like, okay, like, that's not a problem to me, but I'm not showing that movie to my 3-year-old. So again, I'm not giving really clear lines, but I definitely think that there is, there's a line to draw. Now, the last thing I'll say here, Johnny, is I don't think it's also just simply only consume Christian content versus non-Christian. And so I discussed this in my show here. Let me see if I can actually pull this up really fast. When I talk about technology, this is a great question. When I talk about entertainment, let me pull up my keynote here so I can actually show you on my screen what I show students. Come on. Okay. So what I will often do is, here's what I'll show students. Let's see, is this going to work? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So here's what I'll show students, and I'll say, okay, when I grew up, I had this approach when I was a student of like the line approach. And this is how a lot of people address technology. And it's like, okay, so on one side of the line, you have good, and on the other side of the line, you have bad. And then we say, and I always ask students, okay, what's on the bad side? And it's like, especially if it's a Christian group, if there's anything with like cursing, blood, violence, witchcraft, evil, magic, that stuff is all bad. And then the good side is like, if it's about nature, the Bible, or Jesus, that's good. And then what we then do sometimes is then we replace this and say, well, then this is Christian content, and this is Christian media versus this is secular media. And then we say, only engage with only engage with Christian media, do not engage with secular media. Now, Sean McDowell recently was speaking at Summit, where I was in Colorado for the last 3 weeks, and he did a little experiment with students. Was like, hey, should you watch a movie with like, nudity or not nudity, and cursing and not cursing, and violence and not violence? And then he actually showed that the movie that didn't have any of these like bad things was actually a movie that like, ooh, everyone would go, oh, I would never watch that. And the movie that had all the bad stuff was like Schindler's List or something like that we go like, oh wow, that's a really like important movie to recognize what's going on and what happened in the world. And the nudity is not a sex scene just for entertainment purposes. This is showing what happened to individuals that we need to be aware of in an age appropriate way. And so that's something to think through. Now, what I will address, and I'll say this here really quickly with this, like, do we just only consume Christian content? I think what happens, what I teach is that there are 3 pitfalls with this approach, with this Christian versus secular line approach. And if that's all we have, and that's just how we create this line, here are the 3 pitfalls. Number 1, this can lead to a how close can I get to that line mentality, right? And we recognize this with like dating. It's like, how far is too far? That's the question that all high school kids are wanting to ask. And they want to know, where is that line of this is bad versus this is good? And now then the question is, we often try to get as close as we can to that line without crossing it. I remember asking a middle school group and said, like, can you imagine if I said that as a father? How close can I get to the line of being a bad dad without being a bad dad? Like how far is too bad? Like how little of amount of time do I have to spend with my kids? How bad do I need to treat my kids? And then I'm going to get as close to that line without crossing it as I can. And a middle school student instantly yells out in the group, the fact that you asked that means that you're a bad dad. I was like, that kid gets it. If I'm trying to figure out where's the line between a good dad and bad dad, and how close can I get to that line without crossing it, that's the wrong approach. The question is, how do I be the best dad I can be? How do I be the best husband I can be? How do I figure out how to do what is good, not just how close can I get to the bad without being bad? But sometimes this line approach can create that mentality of how close can I get? How close can I get to the cursing and violent and bad movies without actually being on the bad side? Number 2 is I think that the line approach can seem arbitrary. Where it's like, okay, but why this and not that? And I think students are often complaining about this growing up. My parents wouldn't let me watch this, but I could watch that. Like, this made no sense. And sometimes it seems very arbitrary of why we pick and choose the things that we do for the good and the bad side. But here's how the third point I think relates specifically to your question. I think sometimes when we create the line approach with entertainment or technology of what is Christian entertainment versus Christian content versus secular content is then we often turn our minds off. And I think when we do, we miss really, really good stuff in the non-Christian secular side. And we don't see really bad stuff on the Christian side. There are good non-Christian movies and songs out there that are really, really amazing and teach really good lessons, but are not Christian produced that I let my kids watch. There are also Christian produced things that are really terrible. And I've been given devotions that are straight up like heretical. And if I go, oh, well, it's a Christian produced thing, and so I'm going to stop thinking about it, then that is, I think, where we get into a problem. And so that's where I would say sometimes if we just say, I'm only going to let my kids consume Christian content, well, sometimes that's not better. And there is non-Christian content that is actually really good. And so what I would argue is that while there should be some lines, what I argue and try to teach students, instead of having the line approach, then instead we flip it and we say, okay, I want to focus on what is true, good, and beautiful. I want to have the discernment, or maybe the kid does not have the discernment at that moment, but the parent does, to say, is this song, is this movie good? What does it say is good? And is it good? What does it say is true? Is that true? And is it beautiful? And I think that if we have this sort of approach, we can actually see things that are true, good, and beautiful, both in Christian-produced and non-Christian produced stuff. And so that's, as a parent, I want to have this sort of focus, is not just, is it Christian content or not, but I want to say, is what this is saying true? Is that true? What does it say is good? Is that good? Is this beautiful? And then I want to be discerning and then be able to show my students, my children, things that are true, good, and beautiful, whether it's Christian content or not. And then there are times where I'm going to introduce them to content that actually has lies in it, where I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to have them watch something, and it's like, okay, what did you notice? And it's like, well, it said that this was true and that's not. Like, I want to start to teach that critical thinking in my child where they can start to see that. So for example, I often give the illustration in this talk of the movie Ocean's 11. And now if you know the movie, it's the old school movie where's I have the thumbnail of it. Let's see here. Ocean's 11. There's Ocean's 11 right there. Where it's like, hey, it's just entertainment. It's like, oh, hold on a second. Because most people would think that stealing is bad. Yet this movie is written in a way where at the end of the movie, you are cheering on the thieves. And when they finally steal the money, you're like, yay, woo, good job. Now, does that mean don't watch it? I don't think so. But I'm just wanting to keep my mind turned on to recognize that, hey, while they're getting me to cheer for a bunch of thieves as if they just did a good thing, I don't actually think that's a good thing to just go stealing money, even if someone is really rich. And so that's where I hopefully want to just encourage people not to just simply have the line approach of Christian content or not, but to be thoughtful. And then also be able to, at an age-appropriate way, knowing your child, to start to introduce them to things that might have some lies involved, but then be willing to talk about it and think through it. And there's incredible movies and examples that do that. So there's a really long question or long answer to your question, Johnny, but hopefully that is somewhat helpful, even though it was long and partially vague. All right, again, the lines are open. I have some time left. If anyone wants to call in and chat with me, I'd be happy to talk on the phone with you all. Let me come back here to the live chat. Mirza says, horses and donkeys have helped humans build civilizations for 5,000 years, and then they were totally replaced by technology in a couple of decades. Do you think that technology could someday totally replace humans in every way? I don't think so. And here's why. Let me pull this up. Switching between my my PowerPoints here, or my keynotes. Here's a quote that I have from John Lennox that I think is important in this conversation. Where does he say it? All right, here we go. It's one thing to make a machine, John Lennox says, that can simulate, say, a human hand lifting an object. It's a completely different thing to make a machine that can simulate the thoughts of a human when he or she is lifting the object. And so here's why I bring this up, and here's why this came to mind when you asked the question, is that there is an ability to think and process and innovate and design that is necessary for humans that I don't think technology can or will replace in every way. That there's always a human required for the inputs. There's always a human mind behind anything. So the human has to create the AI to then be able to do it. Humans are constantly feeding and teaching and training these systems. And without the human input, you don't get it. And maybe we would have an AI replace some aspect that a human does. And I mean, that's the difference. And that's the debate right now. I mean, that's the debate that people have currently when they debate the two different types of AI. And it's right here is that we have narrow artificial artificial intelligence, whereas AI is trained to do one thing really, really well, but in a very narrow way, versus artificial general intelligence, which is being able to do all that humans can do. And the question is, are we ever going to get artificial general intelligence? Are we ever going to get AI that can actually do everything that humans can do or better? And I hesitate because AI does not have consciousness. AI does not have that sort of learning ability that humans do, having free will and a mind to be able to process these things. And so it can replicate certain things. Technology can lift objects more than a human hand can lift. But there's something that is often required of humans to always have that input, at least at the beginning. I think one thing that shows this is that there's a recent Dude Perfect video. If you don't know Dude Perfect, it's one of the more famous YouTube channels out there with millions of subscribers. They start off doing trick shots and they do lots of stuff. But one of their recent videos, my son really likes this video, is humans versus technology, or human versus machine. I forget what they called it. And they want to see, are humans better or are machines better? And so they have different sports. So one is these like robotic legs. And so they have this like normal human put these robotic legs on, and the robot leg assister things. And then he raced the fastest human, and the human just destroyed the normal human with robot legs. Then they had some Japanese robot that's been designed to shoot basketballs with near 100% accuracy. And there was a shooting contest. And the robot won. The robot won that one. Then there was like a robot soccer where the robot leg could kick the ball like insanely fast with precision in the corners of the goals, and the goalie didn't stop a single shot. And then there's a robot goalie that could stop almost everything unless you barely put it past the fingertips of the thing. And it's like all these ways in which robots are better than humans. But here's what's interesting. At the very end, there was a tie. It's like 3-3, robot and human. And so the tiebreaker was this. They took the Japanese basketball shooting robot that was designed to shoot basketballs with near 100% accuracy. And instead of saying, okay, we're going to do a 3-point contest and see who's more accurate, and the robot clearly wins because it was designed to do this one thing really, really, really well. And they changed the rules slightly. And it was, you have to make one free throw, one 3-pointer, and one half-court shot. Now, what this robot could do was move, but it was not designed to move like a human, and it was very slow. So as soon as they go, the robot very easily makes the first shot, the free throw, and then takes forever to slowly back up to the 3-point line to make another shot, to then take forever to slowly move back to half court, and the human actually won that one. And so this example, I think, was really interesting to show that there is just an ability that humans have to do lots of things really well and to learn and innovate and grow. That's one thing that John Lennox says in his book on 2084, is that beavers are really good at building dams and bees are really good at building hives, but a beaver will never learn to build a hive and a bee will never learn to build a dam. But humans, watching both, can learn to do both, and then we can innovate and figure out stronger materials and new designs and new this to make it sometimes even better. And sometimes we fall short. Where I realized in my research for this, I did a video a long time ago on AI, and there was a Netflix series where the first episode was talking about how these leading designers at some school in like Georgia Tech were creating artificial limbs, but they were trying to mimic a human hand, and they just couldn't. No matter how much brain power went into this and innovation and all this kind of stuff, they could not get it to function like a human hand. This was still the pinnacle of, it says, perfection or greatness that they're trying to mimic that they can't. And so there's a ways in which robots can do things better, but there's still significant ways in which they fall short. So I am skeptical that we will totally replace humans in every single way, because human input is required in order to do so much of what we do today. Alrighty, last fry bender. Thanks for the question, guys. I really appreciate it. These are fun. I'm talking about a lot of other things that I wasn't planning to talk about, which is why Q&As are always fun. Let me get some coffee really quick. I should have brought my water because my throat's getting dry. I'm not used to talking like this. Do you think there was an illusion of happiness prior to modern information technology? Certain groups could control thought that can't now. I'm thinking of the Shiny Happy People documentary. So I haven't seen that documentary, so I don't know what that is. Last Firebender, sorry about that. Maybe there is an illusion of happiness, but there's also, this is where the studies can be difficult, where if it's self-reported, people are like, oh yeah, I'm really happy. No, I'm not. But you can track the trends of even self-reporting. And there was huge spikes in depression and anxiety and mental health when smartphones were created, when social media became more popular. I mean, a lot of people have tracked this. And so I'm not saying that you're saying this, but to say it's all an illusion of happiness, I don't think. Maybe there's some of it there, but the studies also seem to show that no, there's something actually connected to modern information technology and what it is doing to mental health. Because also when you take away information technology from people, how their mental health changes also has that influence. So I think there is a causation thing there, and I don't think it's just an illusion from what other people have. But no, I have not seen the Shiny People documentary. Mirza asks, have you ever watched AI debates or argued with AI about religion? For example, there is an AI Catholic apologist. I've seen some AI conversations. I don't know what you mean by AI debates. And I've never argued with AI about religion. I don't know. That's never been something that's intrigued me, to sit there and have a conversation with AI. Sometimes it's really funny to see what people do ask and what AI says. But no. I have not argued. So I don't know what else to say to that other than no, I haven't. What have you seen? What's been interesting to you, Mirza? All right, last question here. So either new questions or callers, or the show's going to end early. Do you think technology can ever have free will? Actual free will, not a mimic free will and pulled from the internet? I do not. I'm pretty confident that technology cannot have genuine free will, because it will always be determined by the inputs, by the programming. It may be learned in the sense that it is not something directly programmed by the people, and that it's some ability that it learned. But again, we're using that word learned in a slightly different way than I think humans learn. And so I think, again, Mustafa Suleiman talks about this in his book, that technology and AI has become what he calls this black box, that we sometimes don't know how it got the answer it got. We put an input in and we get the output, and we're like, well, how did that output, where did that come from? And we don't know what happened, because there's been machine learning to the point where we don't know how it got where it got. At the same time, we know that it's doing what it was programmed to do. And that AI is not consciousness, because consciousness coming from free creatures being able to think. And so I think that AI is not conscious. Consciousness does not come from purely physical things. Therefore, consciousness will not be in AI. Again, this is the chapter I'm co-authoring in the book. So hopefully this book gets published really soon. And at least after it's published, I'd be happy to spend some more time talking on the show with my co-author, or you can pick up a copy of the book and see what we think. But I think we make a strong case, or at least we try to make a strong case in the chapter, that there's something fundamentally different about humans in the fact that we have souls, that there's an immaterial reality about us, that we are not simply determined by chemicals and reactions. That is something that AI is, and therefore I would hold to the fact that technology will never have genuine free will. It will mimic it. It will look like it. It will make it appear like it's choosing, but it's never choosing. It is determined by the inputs and by the programming. That's why there's times where AI hallucinates. So I spent a lot more time on this. If you're curious, I have a video. A video was sent to me about AI. Here, let me go to my channel really quick. If you go to my channel on YouTube and just search AI, a video was sent to me a while back. Let's see, when did I do this? 6 months ago. And I titled my video, "Is AI thinking, scheming, and lying? Is it sentient?" And the thumbnail says, "Is artificial intelligence conscious?" And this was a video that was sent to me where the person created a YouTube video on AI and how AI was scheming, thinking, and lying. And the question is, was it actually consciously lying, or is it responding in a way that we don't know why it's doing what it's doing, but it's still based on programming. So the other video I did is called "Will Machines Be Like Us?" That was 5 years ago. I am my data. That was the statement there. So hopefully that helps. Shiloh, good to see you here. Let's see. Shiloh has a question. Hi, Ryan. Shiloh here. Good to see you, Shiloh. Any advice on the balance between controlling your children to help them avoid mistakes versus letting them have freedom to make and learn from mistakes, i.e. social media and phones? Oh man. Yeah. So I talked about at length about this. If you came in late, Shiloh, Johnny asked the question of allowing your children to only consume Christian content online. At what point should we influence them with different ideas? Should they be using technology at all? So I talk about that a little bit, but let me just say this, balancing controlling your children to help them avoid mistakes. I want to, again, at age appropriate ways, start to give my children choices that allow them to make mistakes and learn from them in the ways that are not just going to destroy them. And so at the same time, I want to be really consciously aware of how those choices are affecting my kids, and are they getting a little bit too much freedom where it's becoming a problem? So this might be a silly example, but my kids love music, and we listen to a lot of music when we're in the car. And I often want to give my two boys the freedom to say, hey, what song do you want to listen to? And they name the song, and we can listen to that song. And obviously they're within an approved list of songs that I created. And so often they learn new songs because I play the song because I like it. And then they learn the song, and then they want to listen to that song. And then it was like yesterday or 2 days ago that my 2-year-old was becoming really demanding with the song. No, not this one. No, not this one. And we could not listen to anything unless it was something that he wanted to listen to. And it was like, okay, if this is how we're going to be, you no longer get choices. You're going to have to learn how to listen to stuff that you don't want to listen to because someone else chose it, or because this is what we're just going to listen to. And so we do this sometimes with meals. Like, here's another example. It's like, sometimes it's like, hey, here's what's for lunch. That's all you're getting. We're not making you something else. And other times I'm like, if we do have some options, hey, what do you want to eat for breakfast? Do you want cereal? Do you want pancakes? Or do you want, me to make oatmeal or whatever? And so what we're trying to do is I'm trying to not just control my children where every single thing that they ever do and interact with is something that is controlled by me, because I never want them to make a mistake. But I do want to give them some freedoms and some choices in ways that are not going to destroy them. Now, when it comes to social media and phones, I'm not going to give. Jonathan Haidt's article, I think it's available online. So let me search this here really quickly. Jonathan Haidt, The Dangerous Experiment on Teen Girls. I thought it was something that was like published. The Atlantic, Facebook's Dangerous Experiment on Teen Girls. There it is. Oh, you have to be a subscriber. So maybe it's not. I don't know where I got it. Well, if you're a subscriber, you can read it on The Atlantic. On his own website, he has a bunch of data that he suggests, where he has a lot of research on social media from his book, The Anxious Generation. Is social media a major contributor to the rise of adolescent anxiety and depression that began in the early 2000s? He has a bunch of research pointing to that. He has percent of viewings, anxiety prevalence, how social media is leading to that. So he has a bunch of stuff that you can look up. But so there's definitely, like, when it comes to social media, I'm not going to give it to anyone less than like 16-ish. Phones, I might give a dumb phone that can't get all that information at a younger age because they need to contact. So I guess there's those sort of choices that is saying, hey, you don't understand. And we do this with everything. Like, you don't understand. One day you will. I'm withholding this for a reason. This is for your good. And they may not like it. They may not recognize it at the moment. But sometimes they do, where I've known students who their parents, rather than just controlling. So I think this is the difference. is some parents I know, rather than just controlling and saying, no, because I said so, have actually walked their student through why they're doing what they're doing, that the student has then made the own choice that when they were able to get a phone, they chose not to. Because they're like, no. And also I've heard students say, I see what phones do to my friends. I don't want that. And so I think that when we are empowering our children to actually have eyes to see perceptively what's going on, how does this technology affect my friends? How is it affecting my culture, my friend group, whatever it may be? I think that sometimes that can be seen and go, okay, this is a problem and I don't even want this because I have a higher value than what this is giving. So hopefully, and maybe that's a different part of advice. Any advice on having a balance? Well, part of it is explaining reasons, being thoughtful. One thing I learned, Brett Kunkel, I think, discussed in an interview on phones and technology that I had with him on my channel a long time ago, was in his house being able to, the kids always being able to push back and say, hey, if you give a good reason for why this rule is not a good one, we'll listen to you and we'll actually change. Now, obviously, if you say that and never change any rule, then maybe it's not true. But if you actually are like, your kids make a good point, like, Mom, Dad, this is arbitrary, this doesn't make sense, or this, whatever. And you go, that's a really good point. Okay, we'll stop that then. And you show that, then I think that you're showing your students, your children, how to be thoughtful, how to think critically, but then also like how to reason well about these sort of issues to where you're not just controlling, but you're trying to do what's best and for good reasons. And those reasons are shared. And then there's going to be times where they go, but I don't understand. Well, maybe you don't, but this is what we're doing. And trust me. And so hopefully that's maybe less than the other times, but at least that would be the advice I give, is to try to be thoughtful. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times where I was just talking to a student recently as well that was complaining about how his parents were handling his social media. And it was almost just like, they just don't get it. I need this. They don't understand it. And so he's like, trying to hack his phone and do certain things. And as part of it, it's like, okay, sometimes parents are really controlling and we have to try to figure out how to get balance. But then other times what is seen as controlling is not, and is actually for your good. But then how are we communicating about this? How are we talking about it? And so I think that would be my advice is age appropriate. Is a mistake that they could make something that is a serious mistake? Or if they make a mistake, is it actually not going to be that detrimental? And we start to slowly learn through very small consequences, hopefully then getting bigger. Alrighty. That's all the questions I see here. Well, everybody, I am going to get running then. But hopefully, again, this was interesting and fun. Next week, I don't know where I've done with all my books, but again, here it is. Next week is this small little booklet. What does depression mean for my faith? It's like 40 pages, really small. So kind of walking through depression and how that should interact with the Christian faith. This one is one that people are looking forward to. So I'm excited about that. And then getting to the Worldview series on political thought. So fun stuff coming up. Hopefully this has been encouraging. Hopefully it's been thoughtful. Hopefully it's challenged and equipped you to think well about these issues. And hopefully, again, the whole point of today is not to say technology is evil, stop, throw it away, run far away from it, but how do we engage thoughtfully and critically with the world around us, recognizing the impact it has, but then also the incredible transformative potential it can have as well. And thanks, Shiloh, for the encouragement on the guests I've had. Always looking for more interviews and trying to bring you good people. And in fact, the one hopefully coming up is that chapter, what was the chapter from this book? Chapter 4? Chapter 4 on gender. I had invited Abigail Favali to come discuss gender. She's a professor at Notre Dame. I wrote the Genesis of Gender that I thought was absolutely fascinating. And then I double booked myself and had to cancel. And then she had to cancel. I just got sick. And so we agreed that we would find another time this fall. So hopefully when I get back from Utah, Shiloh, I'll be back. I'll be in Utah. This trip is different than other ones. So that's why we haven't contacted you, but I'll be in Utah at the end of September. But when I get back from that in October, hopefully I'll be able to introduce an interview with Abigail Favali. But with that, I think that's everything I have for you guys. If this has been encouraging, share it, like it, help me push this information out there to more people, and let me know what you think would be a benefit as a topic to discuss, or content, or ways of doing this. Again, I've always just liked doing try to be as short as I can with the teaching, answering your questions as I go, and then open it up to random questions and calls at the end. I think is fun. So hopefully you enjoy it too. And if you're here at the end, it means you do enjoy it. So anyways, let me say one more thing since I'm ending a little bit early. If you're in the Southern California area, I just booked a new speaking event. I'll be speaking November 2nd and November 16th at Mission Hills Church down near Mission Viejo, Laguna Niguel, that area. I forget exactly where. But if you're in the Southern California area and you want to head out to Mission Hills Church, Sunday, November 2nd or November 16, I will be speaking there. That is open to the public. At the end of November, I'm down in San Diego at the Assemblies of God Youth Convention, Southern California Youth Convention. So I have some events coming up. And then if you are curious to book me to speak at your event, let me know. Speaking at think-well.org is how to connect with me there. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you all next week with a conversation on depression and faith. Until then, continue to think deeply about these things because they are worth thinking about. Thanks for being here. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.